Hello, and welcome to the second Angelo B. Henderson Lecture in the School of Journalism and Media in the College of Communication and Information at the University of Kentucky. We are so happy to have all of you joining us here. This is, as I said, this is the second Angelo B. Henderson Lecture. This is our first in person, which is very exciting. I know we have people joining us on Zoom. We were fully remote last year, and we're so excited to be able to gather together in Angelo's memory to learn about journalism and progress and all of the wonderful things going on in the world. Before we get to learn about our speaker, Bruce Johnson, we are going to introduce you to the man who has brought us all together by introducing you to the woman who made all of this happen. Felicia Henderson is Angelo's widow. She worked tirelessly for 5 years to make sure that we had an endowment in Angelo's name so that we could do this event every year. And we also award an Angelo B. Henderson Scholarship every other year as well. So not only do we have a speaker series, we have a scholarship that allows a student to go and pursue the wonderful career of journalism. So I'm going to turn it over to Felicia. Felicia, thank you for making this Angelo B. Henderson endowment happen. And again, without you, we would not be here today. But we'd love for you to tell us a little bit about Angelo and his legacy so we can understand why this is so important every year to have this lecture. And I will turn it over to you, Felicia.
Thank you so much, Dean Greer. On behalf of our son, Angelo Grant, I want to thank you so much for helping me make this possible. Also want to thank Nathan Darst, the Director of Philanthropy for the College of Communication and Information, Erica Ingstrom, the Director of UK School of Journalism and Media, as well as the faculty and staff of the College of Communication and Information. I'm just so pleased that you, as well as I, want to honor Angelo's journalism legacy in making this series possible. I also want to thank family, friends, family members who are on the Zoom today, who have supported the scholarship and lecture series from the outset. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank everyone for attending, either in person or virtually. We so appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy schedule to hear our guest speaker, fellow Louisville native and legendary anchor, Bruce Johnson. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Angelo. He called himself a word guy. He loved words and the power they had to evoke emotion and change. He would always say it was at the University of Kentucky where his love of words and storytelling began to take shape, where he realized he could use words to bring understanding to the plight of people grappling with community issues or that of business owners, minority business owners in particular. He honed his reporting and writing skills at the Kentucky Kernel and at the Black student publication, The Communicator. During his senior year in college, he was a business reporter at the Herald Leader. After graduation, he accepted a reporting position at the St. Pete Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times. He became a business reporter at the Courier Journal, was a minority business reporter and columnist at the Detroit News, and became an automotive writer at the Wall Street Journal. And you may ask, he covered autos? Well, he questioned that too. But it was at the Wall Street Journal that he broadened his reporting, his reportorial skills, and truly felt that he was in a newsroom that understood him, understood his lens, and the unique stories that he pitched and published for A1. Stories like tricked out wheelchairs, Black church fans, and ultimately the story that earned him the Pulitzer Prize in 1999. He was the first Black journalist and remains the only Black journalist to win the prize for the Wall Street Journal. A few years later, it was at UK that Angelo connected with Professor Buck Ryan and delivered the 25th anniversary Joe Creason Lecture. He was incredibly proud of that honor, and the poster still hangs in the office today. And in 2005, Angelo returned to UK to be inducted into the Hall of Distinguished Alumni. Angelo considered UK family, and I have a clip of him describing it at the Distinguished Alumni Banquet.
In T.D. Jakes' book, The Great Investment, he describes family as just a group of people working together for the good of the whole. What this means is that regardless of who compromises the family, the important thing is that you are a mutually supportive entity and share common goals and aspirations. A family is not the individual members, but the sum total of each individual's contribution. A family is not the individual members, but the sum total of each individual's contribution. In essence, I am who we are. And I'd like to thank you all because UK is part of my family. We are the UK family. How many of you all know that, right? Come on. And the University of Kentucky really means a lot to me. It's here at the University of Kentucky where I discovered my purpose. And while I'm transforming now, I've gone from journalist, I used to work at the Wall Street Journal for 6.5 years, the deputy bureau chief, and wrote exclusively for Page One, and indeed won a Pulitzer Prize. Now I'm at the bottom again. I'm a struggling preacher, and I just started my own talk show from 3 to 6 every day. But it's really important to know that UK has always been here for me and trained me to be able to have a lot of things to offer a lot of people. One thing about the journalism program, it specialized in being well-rounded, and that you had courses in a variety of things. And that for me has been really wonderful. But I just want to leave you all with this. And this is from Rick Warren's book. It says, the purpose of your life is far greater than your own personal fulfillment, your peace of mind, or even your happiness. It's far greater than your family, your career, or even your wildest dreams and ambitions. If you want to know why you were placed on this planet, you must begin with God. You were born by his purpose and for his purpose. You were made by God and for God. And until you understand that, life will never make sense. And I just want to thank UK for being a significant piece of puzzle in my purpose, and that life indeed makes sense. Thank you.
While Angelo was living his purpose-driven life, he lived by two principles. The first one was faith. He took a huge leap of faith to leave a 20-year newspaper career for the ministry. And that was a full-time career move. Many didn't understand it. The local alt weekly, the Metro Times, actually interviewed him for a story about his firing from the Detroit News. But he later said in a sermon, folks without faith will never understand faith. Second, Angelo wanted to make a difference. In 2005, as he mentioned, he was asked to host a talk radio show, Your Voice with Angelo Henderson. He continued to tell stories through that show, bringing newsmakers on to talk directly to the people and giving listeners an opportunity to be heard, to use their voices to discuss concerns primarily impacting the city of Detroit. It was on that show that he co-founded the community nonprofit, the Detroit 300. To the students, I have to tell you, Angelo's journalism journey wasn't always bright and sunny. He had a few editors who doubted him, doubted his eye for stories. Heck, his first editor told him he should leave the business. But that's where his faith kicked in, his support system kicked in. He had questioned his ability, but it was his mentors who gave him the confidence that he had the skill set, he had the abilities. And that's why it is so critical to have mentors. It's critical in any field, but this industry, this journalism industry can be tough at times. That's why it's important to join organizations such as the National Association of Black Journalists, the Society for Professional Journalists, Asian American Journalism Association, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, NLJA, the Association of LGBTQ Journalists, and the Native American Journalists Association. You'll hear our speaker, Bruce Johnson, describe his role using his voice and example to pull others out of deep waters. Ultimately, Angelo made a difference through his storytelling. In 2000, Columbia University named him one of America's best reporters on race and ethnicity. He also made a difference giving back to students, journalists, and people in the community. That's why the scholarship in his name is so important. So now I will turn the program over to Erica Engstrom, who will introduce our awesome guest speaker tonight.
Thank you, Felicia Henderson. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, a beloved anchor and reporter for WUSA 9 in Washington, D.C. for more than 4 decades. Bruce Johnson anchored the CBS affiliates 6 and 7 p.m. newscasts. As a journalist, he could cover anything and everything, according to Scooby Ryan, Associate Director of the UK School of Journalism and Media. A native of Louisville, Kentucky, he earned degrees in political science from Northern Kentucky University and a master's in public affairs from the University of Cincinnati. Since he began his career at Cincinnati's WCPO-TV, he has won 22 Emmy Awards, the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Board of Governors Award, and its Ted Yates Award for outstanding professional and personal qualities in TV news in the Washington-Baltimore region. He is a member of the Washington chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists Hall of Fame and the Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame. Please give a warm Wildcat welcome to Bruce Johnson, this year's Angelo B. Henderson Lecturer.
I thought it was something I said. I want to salute Angelo Henderson, Pulitzer Prize winner, wordsmith, who came to demonstrate that the pen is, in fact, more powerful than the sword. That those of us of color cannot escape the responsibility of telling our stories, to shine some light where there has been none on a people who collectively have been nothing short of incredible with what we've been able to achieve when given the chance. I wrote a book. I've actually been in the business almost 50 years. The title of my book is Surviving Deep Waters. And the title comes from the fact that I grew up in Louisville's segregated West End. And there was Chickasaw Park that bordered the Ohio River. And as kids, we would swing out over the branches over the Ohio River and drop like rocks into the waters, even though we couldn't swim. We learned, though, quickly to dog paddle back to shore so the current didn't take us downstream to God knows where. That was just urge time. Surviving deep waters became a goal. It became who I was, as a mantra, as an individual, but also as a reporter. I should also point out, though, I grew up loving UK. This was the school that I wanted to attend. You know, most of you young people think you know Kentucky basketball, But I don't know if you know Louis Dampier, Pat Riley, Dan Issel. I could go on and on and on and on. I followed that team religiously. And I would kid myself, I would dream that I'm going to go there one day. Not play basketball. I wasn't a basketball player. Thought I was a football player. But you know what? The guy that I really looked up to, one of my heroes in football in Louisville, was Wilbur Hackett. I tried to emulate him on the football field. Failed there too. I wasn't the football player that he was, but never gave up. I continue to follow UK, and thank God the football team is winning these days. When I was coming up, they never won. My late father-in-law would bring me to football games, and I'm like, why? Why are we going to get? Can't get basketball tickets? I appreciate and applaud Coach Cal and what the team's doing now. And I've asked the question, I'm not even going to ask you because I know the answer. Are we capable of winning it all this year? All the hands went up in the class that I was talking to. I'm truly honored to be a member of the Journalism Hall of Fame here, even though I never made it here as a student. Please include me in your network going forward. You know, I like what comedian Chris Rock once said. He said, you know, when you meet me, you really don't meet me, you meet my representative, the person I want you to see. Bottom line is, we put our best face on, make most of small, unimportant conversation. I didn't want anybody to get too close, right? Even as a journalist, because we want to get into everybody else's business. We don't really want people getting into ours, do we? It takes a long time before you kind of figure out who you are, where you're going, your purpose in life. When you can shed the fear of being discovered, you know, for the fraud that you sometimes feel that you are. How much of this is me and how much of this is them? How much of this is wanting to please? But you know, when you've been in the business as long as I have, you tend to drop the BS at some point in time. When you get past the point of, are they going to fire me? And you kind of come to realize they need me, or they wouldn't keep paying me, or the other stations wouldn't keep calling me. Nothing left to hide. And it eventually becomes, what can I do to help? What can I do to change things? What is my responsibility? Angelo Henderson also understood this. What is my responsibility? This is a vocation. This is a gift. This is a privilege. I'm not supposed to be here. I grew up poor, Black. In the segregated part of Louisville that was also poor. Even though our heroes and role models didn't live far because of legal segregation, I could walk a few blocks and see the doctors, the lawyers, the funeral home directors, the bankers, the teachers, the educators, college grads, the new cars, bigger homes. But we started out in the projects, okay? In the 1950s, it was illegal for Black people to buy a home in an all-white suburban neighborhood outside of Louisville. A couple of white journalists, Ann and Carl Braden, put their own lives on the line when they purchased a home in the Shively suburb, only to try to sell that house to a Black couple, Andrew and Charlotte Wade. I write about this. Ann and Carl were arrested. The house was firebombed. The Black couple was forced to return to the segregated West End and live out their remaining days with the rest of us. Ann, in 1963, was commended by Dr. Martin Luther King in his letter from the Birmingham jail. We all know we shall overcome, okay? We all know that speech. If you haven't read the letter from the Birmingham jail, you need to do that. That's my favorite. My mother was born in 1928, raised by her grandmother, Millie Buckner. She'd been born in Pembroke, Kentucky. Millie's parents, my great-great-grandparents, had been slaves. I'm not going to give you a history lesson, but just discovering this stuff. I didn't know all this growing up in Louisville. My people didn't have time to talk about this. They were just trying to make ends meet, or maybe they were trying to forget. Millie was born Millie Buckner in 1865 or thereabouts, roughly 2 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The town was Pembroke, as I said. not far from the Tennessee border in Christian County, Kentucky. Millie's mother was named Unk, which could have been a misspelling. The census, the first after the Civil War, the census taker could have been writing down what he or she heard, not necessarily what my great-great-grandmother was saying. It happened a lot. Millie's father, his name was Jim, common name. Both parents born in Kentucky, but it's a fact, I'm the descendant of slaves brought to the United States between 1700 and 1808. My people likely were captured and transported across the Atlantic to Virginia. Ancestry.com, we all know that, right? Says I'm 32% Nigerian, 16% German. Like President Barack Obama, I had visited the slave houses in West Africa, specifically Gorée Island, off the coast of Senegal. And those visits filled me with anguish and pride. Anguish for what my people were put through, including my great-grandmother. But pride in Millie and my mother for their perseverance so that I could be standing here today. Not a history lesson, but this is the time to tell our story, not to make somebody else feel bad. My people have felt bad and more bad for a long time. This is time to just go back and correct history. We're journalists. What we do, get it right. Okay? We can argue about all the side shows and all that other stuff, but all we got to do to tell the whole story, get it right. There is so much wrong with journalism today that you're going to have to fix. You know, I came in a long time ago. I came off the streets in the riots in '68 and stuff with an attitude when I hit the college campus. And that's where I learned about those that have gone before me and the struggle and how we got to take it further. And the way my parents came up, that's not sufficient. We got to change some things. We've learned recently that we're saying again, we got to change some things. I'm not bitter. I'm not carrying grudges or resentments. My great-grandmother, my mother, paid my fare. I got to play it forward. I owe them now. It's about their legacy. And just sometimes thinking about their legacy kept me from getting fired a lot of times, reminding me of what I'm supposed to be about. Angelo, I'm sure, went through the same thing. Millie made her way to Louisville, incredibly poor. And a lot of this they kept from us. I always felt she didn't think we could handle it, that this kid couldn't handle it, and she was right. So lived in a duplex in an alley in East Louisville. The home had no running water, no heat except for a coal and wood stove in each room. But as a child, I used to love to visit Millie. You know, you don't get grandma's love without visiting grandma. That unconditional love. It's okay, baby. Everything's okay. Dust yourself off. Come on in here. My mother grew up in that environment, in an alley. Was determined to become the first in her family to graduate high school. Not only did this woman graduate high school, she went on to almost single-handedly raise 8 children, and at age 52, got her undergrad degree from the University of Louisville. I tell people that's the cloth that I'm cut from, okay? It was never easy. And in my book, Surviving Deep Waters, which is being released this month, February 22nd, it's dedicated to my mother and my great-grandmother. I'm reminded that in my home, it was violent at times. My stepfather was a raging alcoholic. Guns would go off. Police would show up at my house. We were glad to see police. That's the only way to stop this. There was no family service to come and try to talk this out. There were no support groups available that I know of or that they knew of to kind of help us out of this. But police came. Different kind of police that I read about and have to cover today. Not all police, talking some. Years later, as a broadcast journalist, as I was coming into my own, and when I was going from Cincinnati to Washington, D.C., I made it a point of going to those communities that had produced me, because those communities were never represented on television and in newspapers. We had to get Ebony and Jet Magazine. I don't know if you've even heard of these things that we would pass around and read, and you'd pick them up in the barber shop. And by the time it got to you, your time to get a haircut, the cover had been ripped out, and every page that somebody in particular liked, that was gone. So you got what was left. But that was how we got our information. Everything on TV was white. Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, Superman, Batman. They're all white men, saving for the most part white women. Okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is about me too. I'm dreaming, don't have permission, but I'm dreaming anyway. I don't know who told me I could do that. But I later learned as a reporter, that stuff affects you. And you get out of your background and where you're from, the projects, and all that comes from being poor. Because you're at the bottom, but the goal is not to be at the very bottom. So you do things to keep those next to you below you, okay? But you eventually learn that those things also, on TV and those things happening in your house, gunshot, all that stuff, it affects you. You can get away, but you never get away clean, okay? There would be more deep water. So, and a lot of it's in my book. There's a lot of honesty in this book. I don't just talk about, all the great stuff I did, all the Emmys, all the awards, blah, blah, blah. But I made it a point to move into those communities and cover those stories. Not just the crime, not just the crack and what it was doing. And it was doing the kind of things that, single women trying to raise families and stuff, surrounded by the violence and the crack. Before I got there, we weren't covering those stories. We were just covering the violence, gunplay, the young guys with the guns, all the TV kind of stuff. I started covering, the parents trying to raise their kids, and the parents who are actually going to work every day, the college kid coming home from the summer who ends up dead just because he's where he has to be. He had dreams and aspirations. Every child I've ever covered wants out of here. Too dangerous, that sort of thing. So, but I also knew that there's more to my people in my community than this violence. So we started making sure that we covered people of color at the PTA meetings. When you're getting reaction to world events, when you're getting reaction, at the supermarket, how you spend your dollars, when you're getting the kind of reaction in terms of what's important to you, what are your values, what do you want for your family, don't come back in here with just 10 white guys or 10 white people. Where are the other people? It's a very diverse community. Where are they? Didn't think about it, but now we'll think about it. That's how you do change. And it's not up to just us, people of color, to make the changes. The changes really come when people who look like you make the changes. Fast forward, Black Lives Matter on the streets, okay? So, pandemic, we're all locked down inside. I'm broadcasting from my studio, my dining room, my home. My wife is my volunteer, bad attitude, executive producer. She doesn't want to be there. She tells me I owe her all the time. And I'm telling her, you'll get a raise when your attitude improves, okay? You can imagine where that went. But as I'm watching people take to the streets during a pandemic, protesting George Floyd's murder on television, caught on videotape. Imagine what story would have been if it hadn't been caught on videotape, okay? And as the demonstrations get larger and larger, I look up and there are just as many white people in the streets as black people, okay? But I see our reporters walking past the white people to interview the black people, okay? Because they see this as a black story. It's a black story. And I'm like saying to my reporters, look, I know why the black people out there. They've been out there since Trayvon Martin and others, okay? No, today's story, in addition to those interviews, you need to tell us why the white people out there. What is it that prompted you to get out there? Because let's face it, cops, law and order. There's a different kind of policing that goes on in a lot of your communities, okay? And so we started interviewing these people, and they tell you, there's no wiggle room here. There's no debate here what happened. Guy was murdered. Even when people are yelling to the cops, stop it, intervene, do something. So you had my neighbors, who since had moved to New Hampshire, 3 boys there. They started doing interviews with me, live. Why you can't, no wiggle room now, you gotta do that. They went down to Black Lives Matter, protested, but that's the kind of kids they are. They had the first Black Lives Matter sign on our block before we did, So my point being, we're all in this. And as journalists, you got to take a side. You got to take a side in some of this stuff. We've hidden behind objective journalism, can't have opinions. In some instances, it's clear. Right is right, wrong is wrong. 2-year-olds know the difference. But now we've gotten tangled up into this misinformation. And people were calling me, and what about the other side? I'm like, which side? Well, what he said. What he said is not true. Any 4-year-old knows that. I used to turn to news directors and general managers and a corporate CEO of a broadcast company on stage. What are we going to do about so-and-so? The misinformation. He didn't have an answer. This is early on. News director. He acted like he didn't hear me, like I'm not speaking English all of a sudden. Hadn't figured it out. They don't know what to do with this. Now, today, reporters who would have been out there in the streets covering stories, packages, what's of interest to people, blah, blah, blah. We're spending time doing things called verifying misinformation. Like all of a sudden, we don't know anymore what the truth is. Okay? I maintain that we do. As journalists, you got to sort this out. You got to be clear on this. Don't be tied down with all the political, you know what? We have a mission. You know what that job is. Put some light on this stuff. I've got a lot of it in here in this book, and I could go on and on and on. But I want you to read the book. I want you to get your friends to read it. It's called Surviving Deep Water, and it's we chased Marion Barry around, smoking crack, supplied by the FBI. I'll close on this, and I was right there front and center. I mean, Marion Barry wrote in his own book about me. He said to Bruce Johnson, one of the most honest reporters I've ever known, we could have been great friends if you hadn't been so committed to your career. And I'm like, you're right, absolutely. What's wrong with you? You were the story that I was after all this time. Marion Barry is DC, whether you like him or not, But fast forward, I was the only journalist that Marion Barry allowed to speak at his funeral. He planned his own funeral because it was never personal. It was about the job. And I continue that in this book. While we're chasing Marion Barry doing crack cocaine, I write in my book that I failed to notice or bring it up in an editorial meeting. We got people in our newsroom who are doing crack. Not just our police reporter is smoking crack, and he happens to be white, but he won't go out into the community to risk his neck to buy the drugs. He sent the black photographer, one of who is my best friend. I only learned this story when I started researching my book. Okay, I don't name him. This is not getting even, selling scores. But that story needs to be told because the demand for crack and cocaine and everything else is really being fueled by people who had money and means and jobs and stuff, not just the poor people that we were covering the hell out of, right? They would all have been dead of overdoses if it had just been them using the drugs. So I just say this is fact. This is not just being objective. This isn't right or wrong, left, right, that sort of thing. It's tell the whole story. And that's all I was asking in our editorial meetings and places like that. And that's all I ask of you. Tell the whole story. Sometimes it's hard to tell the whole story. And you put it out there, now you just, I hope I'm right, and you're waiting for the criticism, and it wears on you. Sometimes they wear you down. I've had my phone just blow up, and I've been followed and threatened and blah, blah, blah. But if this is meant for you, you'll stay with it because it's important work. And these are important times. And there's a reason why you're sitting there and other people are not. You got work to do. Thank you.
Are you open for some questions?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Where's the mic? Do you have it? just very quickly, I wanted to thank a couple of people that put this on, and we're going to do some questions. Tracy Hutchinson has been doing all the logistics for this visit. Thank you, Tracy. Chris Lamore, who's back there as our Zoom and video and AV edit. And then there's also Logan back there, assist. Thanks so much. Two of our faculty members, Kathy Urch has been putting this on with the School of Journalism and Media, and Kira Hunting, who is joining us. She is our Chief Diversity Officer in the College of Communication Information. This event is also co-sponsored by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee in the college. So, and then the other thing I wanted to say is, how many of you guys are students in the room? Okay, so I'm going to give you an assignment, and I'm sure there's a couple of students on the Zoom as well. If you will tell me something inspiring that you have heard from this talk and send it to cidean@uky.edu, we will send you a copy of Mr. Johnson's book, courtesy of the college. So we've just sold you some books here.
I need 1,000 students to respond to that.
So again, cidean@uky.edu, which you should all know because we send important announcements to you. But send us something inspiring, and then I will share those quotes with you as well.
Yeah,
from the
thank you,
students.
thank you, thank
Okay,
you.
and so with that, let's open it up for questions. And I'm doing all Phil Donahue with the microphone. Who's got a
Doing a
question?
great job.
For Mr. Johnson. There we go.
I just want to know how you got your start in journalism, how your background you feel has shaped the journalist you are today.
Right. Journalism found me. There was nothing in my background. I've never had a journalism course. I already had 4 years of journalism experience in a newsroom, working for a guy by the name of Al Shadowcotty, who was the news director and anchorman at WCPO TV in Cincinnati, and one of the finest journalists I've ever. I was just blessed to go to work for this guy. I mean, because I sat here and he sat there, and he hired me and he hired 2 white women at the same time. He didn't have any women, he didn't have any blacks in his newsroom. And he was, he didn't take anybody's job, he was expanding. Noon report was going from half hour to an hour. They were doing more news in the morning, that sort of thing. But my job, because I had some radio experience, you know, I'd done college games and stuff like that. And I'd always been a good student. I dropped out of Kentucky State because I ran out of money and didn't want to borrow money that I couldn't pay back. And so, you know, I applied for a job with Shadowcotty. I just went in and filled out an application. And I didn't expect anything to come of it. And I'd come back to Louisville, and I'm telling my mom again, I'm just here temporarily. I'm not staying, okay? And he called me. And I think I packed my little car up, and I was out of there in hours on my way to Cincinnati. I stayed with some fraternity brothers on campus, University of Cincinnati, you know, and I always knew I was gonna go back to college. I mean, are you kidding me? It's no brainer. I owe that not so much to family, I owe that to me, you know? And then I knew I was gonna go beyond college. But anyway, so Shadowcotty gives me a job. I'm a desk assistant. That's what I was, you know? It would be like you being an intern, like an intern, really. So I'm sitting there with the assignment desk and all the police radios and scanners in front of me. And right here is Alan White, who's his editor, whatever you want to call him. He's Mr. Everything. He helped Shadowcotty build this station. And this station was so successful. I mean, there was no other news in Cincinnati when I was there with Shadowcotty. We pulled 50 shares, and we gave CBS their biggest lead-ins and that sort of thing. And so Alan White tells me one day, and I learned real quickly that if you come up with stories, if you hear stuff on scanning, you know, if you get good at this, you can break stories. And then I realized, oh my God, you get a lot of attention if you're breaking stories. We've learned, that kind of thing. And I'm like, they actually pay for this, getting in other people's business. So my first story that I broke in less than a week, the head coach at the University of Cincinnati, Tay Baker, fired. That's a big deal. Basketball is a big deal in Cincinnati, right? Nobody could find the players. You want the players, right? And so I'm like, wait a minute. I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. I got fraternity brothers up there. They put me up when I first got there. So I called them. Are you kidding? Start on the team, Derek Dickey, he's a Kappa. And they named like 4 or 5 guys. You think they'd be willing to talk to me? They called me back in 5 minutes. And it's like, yeah, can you get up here? So I just stood up and I said, Al, I got so-and-so on the phone. He says, he gives me the best photographer. I go up there and that night I'm on TV for the first time. I didn't know what I was doing. My hands like this for the interview, like this. My photographer's not brisk, like this, okay, that kind of. So, and then maybe a week after that, Cincinnati was looking for a new archbishop, okay, in Catholic. I've been in the seminary for 2 years, high school, studying to be a priest, right up the street, 8108 Beachmont Avenue, right outside Cincinnati. So I'm like, well, who do I know? What I'm getting at is I'm networking from the beginning. We all have networks. And every young person I've talked to, I've run across today, I'm like, better make me part of your network. I know some people, okay? So I called out to the seminary. I'm like, anybody have any idea who the new archbishop is going to be? So the priest says to me, hey, Bruce, how you doing? Good to see you doing well. I mean, I've been out of seminary for a while, okay? And they remembered me, though. So I hadn't, burned any bridges or anything like that. And he said, I think it's Bernardine, guy out of Chicago. So I just, Al, I understand this guy named Bernardine. He looks at me like, how would he know that? Al makes one phone call. He confirms, okay, change everything. We got to pay a new page one. Blah, blah, blah. The other guys look at me like, who the hell is this guy? You know what I mean? So like that. And so I ended up working the assignment desk on Sunday night because we had to break a story Sunday night at 11 o'clock so that the Cincinnati Enquirer had to give us credit the next morning. They didn't have time to get their own sources. So we just did incredible stories. I mean, guy steals 2 Rembrandts, at the art museum, and the paintings are so hot, he didn't even know what to do with it. So he surrendered them and turned them in our studio to Al Shalocard. I'm sitting there watching this, like, are you kidding me? It's just incredible. And the police, they're in the studio, locked in the other studio. They can't get in to see the painting until Shalocard is finished with his live shot. So that's where my news DNA starts. Okay, are you kidding me? We had a great time. I mean, we had oh my God, and I was young and stuff, hadn't gotten married and stuff. Then and when I finished grad school, that's when it was time to move. Okay, I'm ready to go. I'm not here just to report. I'm looking to make some noise. Young people, y'all talk about your brand and stuff now. I get it. We didn't call it that then, but I get the brand thing. The brand is you. Because if not, if you don't have a brand, if I don't know what you do and who you are, you can be replaced. So you want to be irreplaceable. You want, when your name comes up, oh yeah, you know what I mean? You need a network, to keep that word out there and stuff. So that's how I got to DC. And so by the time I got to DC, it was like dying and going to journalism heaven, incredible operation, a guy by the name of Jim Snyder, again, another white, conservative, although not as conservative as Shalocard, a mentor. I mean, he was on me. Jim Snyder was on me from the day I got there. He saw the potential. It wasn't like, well, if he makes it, he makes. No. This guy hired me. I'm the #1 draft pick for him. I'm going to make it. And in times when I didn't think I was going to make it, he pulled me aside and he said, let me tell you something. Stop being down on yourself and what you don't know, because in the beginning, they were pulling guys off the stages and out of the theater. Mike Wallace has never had a journalism course. He doesn't have a journalism degree. The late Mike Wallace, the great 60 Minutes Mike Wallace, he was in theater. A lot of these guys were booth announcers, and they were the first anchors because they had these great voices. They didn't know anything, you know what I mean? And I once had one of those guys say to me, if he had to start out all over again, he wouldn't have made it. He wouldn't have been able to compete with all this diversity, with women now, I mean, I appreciate the honesty, and that's all we're asking for. Let's talk about this. Let's stop the BS. It's not just about, well, you're taking opportunities from this guy and you're giving them to this guy. No, it's more competitive. Okay, there's going to be more competition. Ron Dellums, the congressman, the late congressman from California, once said to me, we're talking about Alan Bakke way back in the day. And he was saying, the Alan Bakke reverse discrimination case. So the white guy did not get into med school, and he claimed he didn't get into med school because they gave his slot, the slot he should have had, to a minority, to a black person. I think I got it right, okay? But you get what I'm talking about. Ron Dellums says to me, Alan Bakke is not my enemy. The problem is not Alan Bakke versus my kid. The problem is too few opportunities. Why can't everybody who's qualified get into med school? Are you trying to tell me we don't need more doctors? So at any rate, it's a long answer to your question. That's how I got into the business, and I just knew early on that this is what I want to do. But there's always that side of you that if this don't work out, I need a back door. So I'd already applied for law school, because I certainly wasn't going back home. Okay, I wasn't going back home and admitting defeat. There was nothing. I never knew my father. That's in the book too. But so I didn't have a father. Dad, what do you think? Like my son does me. I get the biggest thrill. My son calls me, because he's got an issue with his son, who's 13, who's a gorgeous, brilliant, just there's a perfect child. And my son, all of a sudden, God, I'm like, shut up. I mean, there's small problems, you know what I mean? Get out of here.
So I was lucky enough to be able to talk to a different journalist from your sort of journalism era, and he has I love the guy. He's been really great, but he's got a very negative outlook on the future of journalism. So when you were giving your speech, you seemed to have a positive outlook. So how have you kept that positive outlook? How have you kept that, just belief in the idea of journalism?
Because we're embedded in this country. We got some issues. There are problems with journalism that, again, you got to fix. And when I say you, here's what's different. When I came in the business, and for the longest time that I'm in the business, I'm working for a journalism company. I mean, when I came, when I was in Cincinnati, it was Scripps Howard, okay, newspaper company. When I went to Washington, it was Post Newsweek. Are you kidding me? Wilbur Bernstein, Watergate, Katie Graham, are you kidding me? And they sold us to another journalism company. But eventually, corporations started buying television stations and newsrooms. And we became agencies. We became departments. And they started looking at us and line item, expenses. Do we really want to spend this on an investigative unit? What's that costing us? How many times? Where do they produce it? How do we know that? Can you quantify that? Consumer unit, can we afford that? So they get rid of these things, and then somebody else comes in and decides, no, we need that. We can monetize that. So you build them up again, but they're shallow of what they used to be because you lost all that experience, all those contacts, and we can do it all on social media. Okay, that kind of thing. Reporters, they used to, in the very beginning, you don't make any money. So I'm just telling you that when you first start your job, you're not gonna make any money. Don't go in asking for a lot of money, okay? Because they're gonna look right by you and hire the next guy, okay? But by the time you get that second and third job, you better be asking for money. You may even need an agent, somebody to look around, know where you stand. Because you don't know, they've got all the information when you first start out. If you haven't gotten those internships under your belt, you've gotta get this done like yesterday. I mean, winter, summer, get 2 internships. That goes on your resume. That's money. And it lets you get in the newsroom, and they will hire you first because they know you. I watched all 3 stations last night and this morning here in Lexington. If you can go from here and you have everything, you have far more experience coming out of UK than I had walking into that newsroom, okay? So if you can go from here and land a gig, at one of the stations, here, their people are good. You got a guy, Larry Smith, who worked in DC. You got Paul Jones. I knew his father at CBS, and I'm doing an interview with him tomorrow, at Fox. These are good people, and the women they've got it there. I mean, sharp people, obviously know the community, and they're working them. I mean, they're on every newscast, and I know what the deal is there. They're working them so they can justify having to pay them because they're paying them probably pretty good money, okay, besides market. But they've got them on a lot. They're working them, and probably don't want to lose them, okay? So my point is, if you could hear, and then you got Louisville, right? Louisville, you got Cincinnati, and you guys are the kings and queens. You ought to be first, and then the other schools, they can pick from the other schools after you're finished. But you got a network. And you can't depend on the school and the faculty to do that for you, and they shouldn't have to do it all for you. Because if you're hustling now, you're gonna be a hustling reporter, and you want to be a hustler. Don't let anybody outwork you. Show up early, not on time for work, not on time because you can get stuck in traffic. Then you're late. You want to be early. You want to be the last one to leave. The social stuff that can come later. Okay, trying to be popular and all that later. You're there. Know what you're there for. The other thing I'll say to you, because it became a real big deal to me, and a lot of young people get fired this way. First time there's controversy, adversarial stuff. We go hide in our feelings. I don't like the way he's talking. It's what he said. I was accused of so-and-so. And maybe that person has issues, whatever. But it's your job, your goals. Try to let that go. Don't carry that. Have somebody back in your network, somebody you can call and talk to about this. I had an instance in Cincinnati where I almost got myself fired because I resorted to what I knew. You know, like I said, when you get out of these places, you don't get away clean. So my thing, I want to let loose with some FUs, and you don't talk to me. That, right? What? You know, and was he really saying what I was hearing? You know what I mean? I'm thinking I'm in like a street brawl, and he's thinking probably he's having a conversation. You know, I'm like, he doesn't know who he's messing with. You know, but I didn't get fired. And, you know, and those instances came up a couple of other times too. And it was easy. You know, you leave people flat-footed and just flabbergasted. Like, I can't believe he wants to shake my hand at what I just said. I ain't thinking about you, dude. I'm trying to get past you. You know what I mean? So I just say that. Watch the feelings. Feelings are not facts. Okay? You deal with that.
Felicia, would you like to ask a question? Would you like to unmute?
How did you know I may have a question? I work as Director of Cultural Competency at the Maynard Institute, which I'm sure you've heard of, Terry. And I discuss oftentimes the notion of objectivity with news organizations and groups and how it has been used to weaponize journalists of color, women, members of the LGBTQ community. Can you talk a bit about that? Because there were a lot of issues that came up during 2020 about who could actually report on assignments. In particular, there was a reporter at the Pittsburgh Press who sued the newspaper ultimately because she was told she couldn't cover protest coverage because she was African-American. Same was told to a photographer. But it's this idea that, you know, if you are of a particular race or gender, that you're too close to the subject. And so you brushed on that a bit, and I was hoping that you could talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Too close to the subject, or you couldn't possibly know anything about this subject. I'll give you just a couple of quick examples. A news director we had, who for the most part was pretty good to me. He let me cover a lot of stuff, you know, and paid me, you know, well, okay, because he had to, okay. But we got a hurricane coming up the coast, okay, mid-Atlantic, and I look up and I'm not assigned to cover the hurricane. Everybody wants to cover the hurricane because, you know, everybody's going to be watching. Some of the stuff, you know, I mean, it's pretty exciting stuff. Let's just sum it up, okay? So I go into him and I'm like, Dave, you know, I'm one of the veterans here. I've covered everything. Why is my name not on the cover of the hurricane? And he says to me, because your hair doesn't blow in the wind. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm torn. I'm like, is he serious? I mean, I know all the images I've seen. Yeah, they have been, for the most part, white people with hair blowing in the wind if they don't have a hat on. But who cares what you look like? If you're dumb enough to stand in the middle of a hurricane, they don't care. So at any rate, I told him, I don't think that's going to wash, so to speak. And you could get sued for something like that, okay? So I said to him, I took advantage of the time to say, and while we're on the subject, I haven't been to the White House in quite some time. Why am I not going to Capitol Hill to cover those stories, okay? Now, I'm not saying that he says, well, I got to make peace with this guy or he's going to bring up the hurricane issue. I'm not saying he said, you know, you're absolutely right, my bad, my fault, whatever. I ended up at the White House and Capitol Hill quite a few times after that. Matter of fact, I would go in, and again, I'm doing some other things that are great, making myself invaluable. I would suggest stories that I just knew they were going to turn down. Stories like, I understand there are some expats, Vietnam veterans, who are still living in Southeast Asia, who don't want to come home. He's like, what? And I'm like, no, seriously, okay? And I heard that somewhere. And so then I go get my team. We have to find some expats. And preferably, they got to live in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area too. In Bangkok, that's the city, you know, that I'm told. And sure enough, we did find them. And I made the proposal to these guys for sweeps period. Plus, we got a half-hour documentary. We got all kind of Emmys. And he, not him, but the assistant news director says, we're gonna let you do this because you haven't let us down yet. So that's where you want to be. Okay. Absolutely right. Here's what happens, Felicia, here's what I experienced, getting back to what you're saying. A lot of those conversations take place in the editorial meetings, okay? When they decide who's going to cover what and how the story is going to be told. If they know that I'm going to go in and tell the story that I want, they may try to work around me and go to the reporter who's just going to do what he or she is told. They may even hand you a script, okay? I have had instances where I've gone out to cover a story in Black neighborhoods, Hispanic neighborhoods, and I come back with a different and better story than they had in mind. And that story went from penciled in as page 1 to like the middle or back end of the show, because my story wasn't as much about the violence, you know, and the images of the violence. It was about people protecting themselves and their families from the violence, okay? So that's not what they had in mind. So that happens. With Black Lives Matter, you saw a lot of that, who to trust. But here's the other thing about the whole Black Lives Matter demonstration. And in my book, I thank Black Lives Matter for getting the country's attention back on this issue, okay? But also, I remind, you know, the young people, that are at the front of Black Lives Matter, don't forget history here. Don't assume because everybody's with you now and TV stations are doing special programming and selling out the time, making money, and they're now committed, to hiring minorities, blah, blah, blah. Look at the boardrooms, okay? One of the boardrooms I talk about in my book, it has only 2 minorities, okay? It had 1 before Black Lives Matter. They have 52 local presidents and general managers running TV stations. Only 2 of those 52 are people of color, okay? So, and to one CEO, I said, yeah, your numbers look impressive now. You're saying that, in the past year, you made 50% of your new hires, minorities and people of color. That's great, and that's because of Black Lives Matter. Yeah, absolutely. We turned to say, okay, what was it the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that? Well, let's just say we took our eyes off the prize. So my thing is, you got a lot of making up to do. And so talk to me down the road, a couple of years from now, and not just who you're putting in front of the camera, not just who you're putting, on the digital side, but I want to see the boardrooms. I want to see, general managers. And I'm not asking you to take somebody's job. Go back to what, Ron Dellum said. Why does the board only have 12 members? Why can't you have 14? Why can't you add? You're not making less money this year than you made last year. Most of these companies made, don't get me started. I mean, even in the pandemic, they're quadrupling, their profits and this sort of thing. So the will, it's the will to do these things. So you're going to be judged all the time. And people that don't know you are going to judge you. People that are just like us are going to assume we are a certain way because of the way we look, that they can count on us. I've been used on both sides. And keep in mind, we're competing for the same stories. So there's competition. It's already built in the DNA of a news operation. Okay.
Okay, you got a shout out from Vincent McGraw to say hello to his old best friend. I'll let slide the fact he just called you old there, but longtime best friend. He calls you one of the best in the TV DC news market. And then he thanks you for the great advice. So that's from Vincent. And then we've got a question from Terry Keys that says, how can our journalism students today differentiate themselves from the social media and influencers? Seems like everything's blurring together. So how do they cut through the clutter and let people know that they are the real deal and they're the ones to go to for the truth?
Wow, that's a big question. Got to be good at your craft. If you're like, a writer, be the best writer you can be, which means you got to read other people's stuff. You gotta hone your skills. I mean, Alan White, the guy I was talking about in Cincinnati, he said to me one day, and this is the time I almost got myself fired. He says, Bruce, I just don't think you're a writer. I don't think you'll ever be a writer. I'm like, what? I didn't say it like that, but I'm thinking that. And he didn't say it in a closed door meeting. He said it in the newsroom where everybody could hear it. And again, you're talking to a guy who's, what, 20. So, and I left there. And again, I didn't have a dad I could call. Is it me or is it him? And that's why I say everybody should read this book, young people, because you're all asking that question at some point in time. I don't care where you're from, what color you are, what sex, whatever. You're always going to be asking, is it me or is it them? You know? And so I sat down and took it, you know, that dress down, you know, in the newsroom. And you know what I did? And this is so far back, you guys don't relate to this, but you know, it's back when we had that carbon paper where you had, every time you typed a story, there were copies of it. You know, I started going in the trash, you know, after people left work, because I knew who the writers were. Jim Lemanik was a great writer, University of Michigan, Bradford. Jim Delaney, copy boy, no college degree, but he was motivated for other reasons. Great writer, great reporter. Two guys I learned a lot from. So I started grabbing their scripts, okay, looking at them, you know, active sentences down in front of the verb, you know, just stuff, you know, the lead. What's a lead? You know, and I started practicing. I've always been a smart guy. You know, it's just a lot of stuff I haven't been exposed to. A lot of words, a lot of words I thought I knew, right? Until you say them out loud. Oh, that's, you know, somebody's like, that's not how you pronounce that. You know what I mean? I used to anchor, do a cut-in for the morning news, and the viewers, if they see for a while, they really, you know, they like you. And if they see you're new and you're young, they're gonna help you. They would do what they can to help you. So there's always that English teacher out there watching me in the morning as I do that little 5-minute cut in. And you know, she'll call and says it in the nicest way. That's not, Bruce, you're doing a great job. By the way, that's not how you pronounce it. You know, and I never did. And then I found a nice way to tell other people who were making the same mistakes I was making, you know? So eventually I got to the point where, again, back to Al Shalakati, the man, the anchor man, the news director, he's sitting in the middle of the newsroom. So your copy will go into him, newsroom stuff, just like a newspaper, right there. The copy goes in there. He marks it up, throws it back at you, okay? And if he just, a couple of marks, throws it back, you're good. If he looks at it, throws it back, and he doesn't like it, he'll say it out loud. What is it? Yeah, so the first time after I went through my practice session, got my copy in, and a couple of things, he puts it back to me like, next day, he looks at me and goes, you know, I'm like, yeah, I can do this. I can do this. You know, I mean, I started back here, a lot of the guys started here, but I'm gaining on you. Don't slow up, okay? I'm gaining on you. So, I mean, that's my thing. We all come in different kind of ways. I didn't come in from the stage. I didn't come in from journalism school. Al Shalakati had an 8th grade education, by the way. When the service, at some point in time, came out and became a copy boy. These were jobs that were, for the most part, reserved for white men, okay, young guys. They were giving you the police beat, who died, blah, blah, police blotter, I think they called it. That's where he started. But he started writing his own column. Great writer. Jesus, could this guy write? And he worked that up. And then when they decided to start TV news operation in Cincinnati, got him over to do it. And it was just, and he would visit me every year when he would come to DC. Alan White came to DC one time. And I mentioned that in the book also. And I think it's his grandson, not his son, but maybe a grandson. He brought him to meet me. And that just said to me, maybe I taught, and Alan White, I got on just great. You know, obviously I taught Alan White some things too. You know, so that's what you want, and that's really what it's all about. You know?
How many of you all are Mrs. DeVito students today? Okay, I'm sure she would like to hear you ask a question, wouldn't you, Professor DeVito? Who's got another question? No pressure. Your teacher is right behind you. Here's one.
For your first question that you answered, you talked about how you were the first Black person in the newsroom. So I kind of wanted to hear more about the racial adversity that you faced and how you confronted and overcame that.
Overcame that is probably too strong a word. You learn to live with it. And let's face it, you know, and you develop defense mechanisms. You know, you laugh at things that aren't funny. You laugh at things today that nobody would dare say. You know what I mean? Because you're going along to get along. You have no status really. You're You're there to get what you can. Probably if people were taking bets, half would bet you're not going to make it. I mean, hell, if I'm just looking at it, I might have bet. I might not have bet on me. And especially if they knew my whole story, didn't know my father and blah, 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 and how I grew up and that sort of, you know what I mean? I got points for having been in the seminary, okay, and being Catholic, okay? They give me points for that, okay, I think. But I write in my book, I develop friends easily. As you can see, I like to talk. And when I see you, I don't care who you are, what you are, I want to know your story. I ran into a 64-year-old woman in the parking lot, and I was coming over here today. She's talking about my tags being Florida tags. I'm like, lady, it's a rental. That's not my car. And so I look at her car, and I'm like, well, where are you from? And I assume she's a professor, okay? She says, yeah. So I'm profiling her. She's profiling me. And she says, yeah, a lot of people do that. No, I'm a student. I could go here for free as long as I pay for my books and parking. So she's part of this program. I was like, well, I just step out of the car and get a story. This is good stuff. And I was telling some of the young people here, you should do a story on her. How big is the program? How many people are here like that? What other schools offer that? Big feather, in UK's a hat, But on the race thing, I don't ever recall being invited to a company picnic, Christmas party. I never went to Al Chalacott's house or anything. And that's really where the bonding takes place with news organizations, right? So I don't know that I knew back then that they even had those things. I just know when I came to Washington, we did those things. So you reflect back, and so you weigh everything. I couldn't even type when I first started there, okay? So Chalacotti takes it upon himself. When he sees it, I'm over there hunting, packing, doing the best I can. And so we started having a contest every night after the 11 o'clock news. Now it's time for all the men to come to where you hit all the keys. And I became second fastest in there. He's the fastest, But still, I never hit all the keys. I'm cheating. I still type that way. I type this book that way. It's just something I don't want to give up. As my comfort. But so I got a lot of help. I mean, Chalacotti let me finish undergrad school. He sent a cameraman to shoot videotape. I mean, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I was almost embarrassed. What are you talking about? Everybody knows I already finished undergrad school, So he supported me because he wanted to keep me. He was very upset when I left. At least he said he was. So it's very lonely. And I would suggest, and I'm glad you brought up the question. I mean, if you're in a situation and you see somebody who is alone, gay, straight, transgender, black, white, male, whatever, get out of your comfort zone, for God's sake. You know what I mean? You're going to be a better team. That person will be a better whatever employee, whatever the job is. That's part of what makes a great team. You know what I mean? People have left workplaces because of the discomfort and hostile environments, and a lot of what was tolerated, when I came up, I mean, it should never have been tolerated, and won't be tolerated today. People go to court for that. Are you kidding me? But I appreciate that question. Thank you. I deal with that in this book. You are standing there with me when Al White is telling me. You are standing there with me when, with all my experience, a few years ago, a news director says to me, why don't you speak English? I laugh about it now, but again, at my old age, I was about to be fired. Because, and even the rest of the staff, obviously he's the guy with the problem, right? The rest of the staff, they're like, what? Our chief investigative reporter, she's sitting next to me, she's like, why don't you speak English? Where'd that come from? So this guy's in trouble anyway. He's going to be let go eventually, but still, you don't get to take a swing, at employees in your talent on the way out, because it's not going well for you. But it happens, it happens. I could only control this, you know what I mean? And I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I mean, one of my mentees, Gail King, CBS, and Gail was a reporter trainee shortly after I came to Channel 9, which meant she followed me all the time. She goes out with me on stories. So we're just rebuilding this woman, right? From you can't wear those shoes down at City Hall because look at them. You had to get some new shoes, stuff like that, you know. And so, so Gail gets a job when she leaves our reporter training program, and she's just good. It was easy for her, okay? In part because she was with us all the time. But Gail calls me one night from Kansas City. I'm going down to anchor the 11 o'clock news, and she's frantic. I mean, I got minutes to be, because the offices up here, news studios on the first floor. And Gail's like, Bruce, they want me to cover a murder. What am I gonna do? I'm like, when? No, now. They want me to go live on a murder. And she's like asking me what to do. I was so pissed at her. I said, Gail, it's time to grow up. Gotta go, click. So Gail tells the story. This is Gail's version of the story. Everything I said is true, up to the point I said to her, Gail says that I said, Gail, it's time to grow up. Bam, I hung up on her. She tells that story. Okay, fine. So I didn't run into her. So I'm interviewing Gail maybe 3 years ago, New York, CBS, because she's really on a roll. She's doing real well, you know. And so we're doing a piece on her. And in fact, she and I are friends from way back. And she's excited I'm up there. And so we're sitting there in the green room and we're talking. She brings up the story again, telling everybody else. So I said, Gail, can you please finish the story? Did you do the live shot? Yeah. How did it turn out? Oh, it's great. Why don't you include that in the story? I said, as a matter of fact, you should be thanking me. You're welcome. Can we move on? So.
We've got a question. Felicia mentioned Professor Buck Ryan earlier in talking about inviting Angelo to come back and do the Creason Lecture. Buck asks, you studied to be a priest. Angelo became a minister. Do you see a connection between religion's pursuit of social change and justice and your role as a journalist?
Had questions. I mean, it's been said to me a couple of times. You're still preaching. You're still pursuing the same kinds of things, trying to make a difference. Still preaching, let's not judge. You're still preaching, let's drop the fear, let's have a conversation. Jesus, man, these questions. I'm gonna tell you the whole book before I leave it. So I'm covering the sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church, right? I'm a naturalist. I've been to Rome several times. Every time the Archbishop is made cardinal, Bruce goes to Rome, okay? So my favorite city in the world. But I was in the seminary, right? So it's only natural, being the reporter that I am, I reach back and I find some of the guys who are in my class. There were only 13 guys in my class. One went all the way to becoming a priest, 13 years. John Fisher, in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. Okay. So, and it was a missionary order. We were all going to be shipped out, you know, Africa, South America, places like that. So I started calling some of my former classmates. Easy to hunt people down. You can find anybody, right? And ask them, you okay? You okay? Everything go okay with you? Because back then, there was no where to go. Who are you going to complain? Okay. Everybody except one guy, you know, was quite adamant. No, I'm good. So, and some years after that, maybe a couple of years ago, I'm working on this book. And he sees that I'm nearly done with this book. And I've written my chapter on, you know, Bruce is going to become a priest. I finished the chapter, I'm telling you. It's called Sacred Heart Seminary, 8108 Beachmont Avenue. I still remember the address. The good son is going to become a priest. It's the name of the chapter. And for the most part, it was about how transformative my time in the seminary was. Taking this poor black kid, you know, put him in school with these preppy white boys, and I just learned a whole new world, blah, 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 a whole new language, all that kind of stuff. And my siblings in Louisville have all made fun of me whenever I come home on break. Look how you talk. You listen to the Beach Boys and shit. But this guy calls me, and he has to leave his home because he doesn't want his wife to hear what he's going to tell me. And he tells me what happened to him. I'm not going to get into details, but they're all in the book. This guy was my best friend in the seminary. So for 45 years after he left the seminary, he could not have a normal relationship with a woman because of what it was done to him. And I had covered stories with other victims of church sex abuse, including the pastor of my own church, St. Augustine's in D.C., Archbishop McCarrick, Washington's Archbishop. He's the poster child now for sex abuse scandal, the only cardinal to be defrocked. He's facing criminal charges now. I covered him. You know, McCarrick, I mean, he was the guy, you know, and he'd call me my friend. He went over to Rome when he was made cardinal, and the parishioners at St. Augustine's, we raised the money to send our pastor, you know, over. And McCarrick rode on the flight with us too. But on the way back, McCarrick, he's riding in the chartered jet of the co-founder of America Online. So now all of a sudden he's Prince of the Church, and he's you know, it's a little different now. I'm a cardinal, you know. So I mean, there's status and there's, you know, there's ego, big time in the church. But so that's another chapter in the book. You know what? Don't even buy the book. If you know the book, wait
You
for the
just-
movie. Who you want to play? You?
Wait, you got to sell these books. Your publishers is going to get mad at you if you
Right,
say those
right,
sorts of
right.
things.
Right.
Okay, we have time for one last questions. And again, students, I'm looking at you. Okay, great.
By the way, your questions have been great. Seriously, good stuff.
So you mentioned growing up, you didn't see people, you know, who looked like you, other Black people on TV. And I can remember being a little girl and knowing I wanted to go into the field of journalism, specifically sports, and not seeing Black females. And that was kind of discouraging to me. So what motivated you to continue to push forward to go into the field? And what's been your biggest reward being a journalist?
Early on, I didn't have a backup plan. You know what I mean? It's like, if this doesn't work, okay, but I didn't have something else that, you know, yeah, I'll go play football. Yeah, tried that in high school. It was okay. It wasn't great. I wasn't Wilbur Hackett. You know what I mean? So, and then, you know, the light goes on. You know that I was built for this. And I just stole that line from a community organizer in D.C. That's a line he used one time when I heard him speak. It's the only part of his speech that was any good too. But I'm like, oh, I can use that. I was built for this. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean when I say journalism found me. And that's the great thing about journalism. You know, you can get it here, you know, at University of Kentucky, or you can get it by doing it. And like in my conversation with Gail, the whole point I was making, and obviously, you know, could have said it better. No, you get to learn this by doing it. I can't talk you through. How do I begin to tell you how to cover a homicide? Because in part, you're so much concentrating on you and how you feel. What about the victim? Why don't you start by telling me who the victim is? Tell me who has lost something with this homicide. Tell me where it happened. Chances are I don't even know the neighborhood. Look around you. What do you see? What do you think? You know, if you want to go as far as to tell me this is my first time, you know, they told me, you know, that I would end up here, but I'm not sure myself what I'm going to think when I leave here. Just leave it at that. You know what I mean? And you're allowed to do that now. Be human when you do your story. And that's gonna pull me into you like, wow, she's got a soul. She cares. She's affected. I'm going to watch her next time. You know what I mean? So that's what separates the journalists and the reporters from the presenters. You know what I mean? You know, don't waste the viewer's time. You know what I mean? Don't waste the viewer's time. And if you can't think of a question, especially in something like that, you know, and sometimes your questions can be too precise because you box the person in that you're trying to talk to. Just go with, what do you make of this? What do you think? Which says to that person, I want to know what you think. I don't have an agenda here. You know this, you live it, you feel it. You know, don't start with, you must be horrified by, oh, now where are they supposed to go with that? Yeah, I'm horrified. Second question. All right. Let them say it. You know what I mean? Let them say it.
So, Mr. Johnson, what do you think of the students at the University of Kentucky?
Include me. I've said this everywhere I've gone today. Include me in your network. If you Google my name, Bruce Johnson, journalist, all my stuff comes up. I think most of it. So you know how to find me. I'm on social media. You got some ideas, you know, definitely hit me up. We're family. You know? And you know, I'm really hoping Kentucky wins it all. We should have had more national titles already. I'm talking basketball now. Seriously, you know, it's just hard to repeat. You know, or to, but this seems. I don't know why I feel like this is the year. God knows the Wizards aren't doing anything. John Wall making $40 million a year not to play. Hard to feel sorry for him, but that was my guy.
Okay, let's give Mr. Johnson a wonderful round of applause for a great talk. And students, remember the offer that is just available to students in this room. If you will send something that was inspiring that you heard today to cidn@uky.edu, we will provide you with a copy of the book. We have many generous donors to the college that like to do these sorts of things for our students, and I think you would really enjoy the book. Again, Bruce, thank you so much for your time today. We have all benefited by having you here and learning about surviving deep water. Okay, thank you all for coming and have a good rest of the evening.